Welcome to Humanities Montana and our conversations programs. My name is Dave Caserio, and today's sort of subject or topic or workshop will be called Writing Montana. And originally we called Writing Montana Writing the Parks. And the idea at that time was to make use of our wonderful state parks, everything from Lone Pine State Park up in Kalispell down to, the Medicine Rocks down in Ekalaka. But we decided that it wasn't just state parks in Montana that were worth visiting and spending time with and writing about. So now we call it Writing Montana. And what that sort of means is that almost any place in Montana, whether it's your favorite museum, in my case, the Western Heritage Center here in Billings, or it might be an art museum, say an art museum, or Yellowstone Art Museum. It could be a historical walk in an old neighborhood of your town, whatever might be interesting to you, in that sense of place that you might find or discover, maybe right outside your door, or maybe a 100-mile trip destination. And the idea is to think about one's sense of place and use writing as the medium for that. And so we call it Writing Montana. And this is set up for writers as well as non-writers. And by non-writers, I mean people who don't, say, consider themselves, oh, I'm a writer. You know, maybe they write a little bit, they journal, maybe they never tried it. Sometimes people also, writing is the main part, but they'll also draw, whether they consider themselves artists or not, though plenty of artists are also writers. The idea is that writing is the medium for the exploration of your location. And now, of course, we have difficulties because obviously the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting us. So we have to take different things into consideration. So part of what I'm talking about now, we do it in larger groups from 10 to 20 people. This can be done by an individual on their own. And I make use of, in the beginning, about William Stafford's essay, A Way of Writing, which is a lovely, wonderful piece that he wrote to encourage writers, but to talk about the writing process. And again, a way of writing only means it's one way of writing, one way of accessing one's internal feelings, mind, dialogue, processing the experience around you, and thinking about perhaps the geological place that you live in, thinking about the flora and the fauna, thinking about the historical, the cultural sense there, because we know in Montana that people have been here for centuries, for thousands of years, long before any of us now alive have gotten there or arrived. And so those are things to think about. And that's why I like the state parks, because they're located in places like that. And so I'm going to talk about this in the terms of a specific one that we've done. And I'm going to locate it at the Pictograph Caves in Billings. And the way that we start off is I do a bit of an explanation about what we're about, which I've just done. I'll talk to you a bit more about William Stafford's essay, so you can get the ideas of that. But then what we usually do is we employ the use of a tour guide, for lack of a better word, term, but is generally one of the rangers at a state park. Now, it doesn't have to be. If we were, say, to do this at the Audubon Center down by Yellowstone, I might ask a friend of mine who's a bird watcher, or a biologist, and take us through and to look and think about, here's a way to look at what's up there that you might not see. So we do a bit of a guide to get a sense of some of the history that might be there, some of the things that we might think about looking at. But always it's what you find is an interest. And for myself, I'm often interested in geology, but I know almost nothing about it. So I want someone to go, oh, hey, look at this, look at this, look at that. In particular, the Pictograph Caves, we had these sort of round circles that on the sandstone. And well, I can't remember now because I don't have my notes. He explained this is what they are, and so we had some wonderful poems and artwork based on those people's attention to that bit of detail, which they might have seen but just went by in passing. So we have a bit of a tour guide and go for a little walk, maybe 15, 20 minutes, so we get a little exercise in. And once that's done, then everyone takes their little notebooks, whatever they want, and they scatter. And they walk around for 45 minutes to an hour, not getting lost, of course. And they just write. And I'll talk about a bit about the process that I encourage, but by no means saying you have to do it this way. Right? So after 60 minutes, you've written whatever you've written, and then we come back and we share. And that's essentially the outline of it. And it's always amazing to me how simple it is, and yet how interesting and sometimes marvelous what the experience that people have. Because what's happening, much like when you read poetry, it slows you down. Right? And taking a walk in any place where you're particularly paying close attention to your surroundings and meditating about it, contemplating, here I am in this place, what has come before me, what might come into the future. And so that, already sends a little shiver down my spine, and kind of prickly hairs right now. And that makes you pay attention to things. And all of a sudden you're in a different space and place. And this poem is by Margaret Myrie. And at the Pictograph Caves, when we did that on a Saturday morning from 10:30 to 12:30, or 1 o'clock more like, we managed to do it on the solstice, which was wonderful. And it was a perfect day to be at the Pictograph Caves, a very spiritual place, among other things that it is on that day. And so people contemplated that sense of the longest day in our hemisphere, northern hemisphere, of the year. Solstice 2020, Pictograph, AKA Indian Caves State Park, by Margaret Myrie. Barren yucca stems devoured by mule deer, scarlet berry clusters on skunk brush, towhee chatters, swallows swoop, lavender bristles burst off Russian thistle. Iridescent bubbles lift skyward into blue solstice, outside ghost cave in our broken world. So I'll explain a bit about the essay by William Stafford. It's called A Way of Writing. And William Stafford's essay is, I love it, because he says that a writer, and while he uses the male pronoun, he means pretty much any of us, he says that a writer is not so much someone who has something to say, but someone who has found a process, okay, that will bring about new things that person would have not thought of if that person had not started to write them in that moment. And he engages, or she, whoever the writer is, in an activity. And later, which is wonderful in his essay, he says that writing is one of the freest, easiest, greatest free human activities that we can engage in, right? And that's a wonderful thing. I don't need a computer. I don't need to carry an easel. Maybe at most like someone who sketches. That's about all that you really need. And so we engage in this activity, this process. And what is the process to him? And it's basically 2 or 3 parts. He wants you to understand that one thing can lead to another. That old thing of, a journey of 1,000 steps, one step, one step, one step. And he says the first implication, the first part is being receptive, just plain receptivity. And he says that when he writes, he sort of clears his place, wherever his location might be. In our case, our location is the spot you found somewhere within this location. At the Pictograph Caves, there's so many little nooks and crannies to sit down and write after you've wandered. And so you find that spot that you're comfortable with, and you're just receptive. Who knows what happens? All of us are different in terms of our process. For myself, sometimes I'll just sit there and kind of just close my eyes for a little bit, or I'll just let my mind wander. And a bit like watching a stream flow by with water, and all of a sudden something happens. Maybe it's a fish, maybe it's a crawdad, maybe it's just the light glittering off the water, but something I will engage in, and I'll take whatever it might be, right? And that's what he says. Something will occur to you, and whatever that might be, you go ahead and engage with it and trust that it will follow. So being receptive. And then, as he says, he'll accept anything that occurs to him. And it might be, I've got gum in my shoe, and I'm here in the middle of this Pictograph Caves. People have been here for thousands and thousands of years, but I'm really worried about the gum in my shoe. Why am I worried about the gum in my shoe? And you'll just keep going that way, right? And so then the next thing he says, that one has to be willing to fail, right? And I always tell the story that whenever I do these workshops, I'll write like everyone else, right? And of course, it was, oh, well, you're the poet. Well, what's he going to write at the end? It's got to be really good, right? Okay, No, it's never really good. Okay, it's almost embarrassingly bad for myself. There might be one or two lines that happen, but I just take my own advice and I follow it. I let one thing happen to another. Now, also that to toss it on its head, everyone who participates, about half the writers suddenly go, whoa, I would have never written that if I didn't do it this way, right? You know, or if I didn't engage in this process, because it's a little tough for them. This reminds me a bit of a program that I used to, when I was at NYU, our teachers, Galway Canal particularly, and Sharon Olds, but they would take us to a location like this, right? They trade their services, you know, for bed and board, and then we just pay our way up there. And we used to call it the poetry concentration camp. And the idea was that you would write a poem, you get there Friday night, Saturday morning, you're out, have a poem done by noon, afternoon, and then you do sometimes 3 poems with one day, and then you go ahead and do it again the next day. And it pushed people to suddenly go, oh, normally I take a week of preparation for a poem, or I have to do it this way, or I always have to do it in rhyme or whatever. But the idea of being receptive, here's your time limit, and what happens? You know, so being receptive, being open to failure, trusting that one thing will lead to another. You might surprise yourself. You might go, oh, no, shouldn't have done that, right? But it doesn't matter. You just keep going. Because Stafford has a wonderful saying, and I paraphrase this, I think. He says, as a writer, in terms of, you know, think you're doing something wrong, or you got a bit of a roadblock or writer's block, he says, if the going gets tough as a writer, just lower your expectations and keep on going, you know, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I have to remind myself constantly to take that advice, right? And he doesn't worry about high standards. So he just does it. He trusts that something will happen because eventually it will cohere. It may not this time, but it does it the other time. So it's a practice and you're engaging in an activity, right? And he makes no judgment about what he's saying or what he's doing. It's not quite exactly what, say, Allen Ginsberg would say, first thought, best thought, because that's a little more loaded in terms of what he actually meant, at least my interpretation of it. So receptive, careless of failure is what he says. And he says a wonderful freedom comes from that, right? They always, you know, it's like people always ask me, you know, do you dance? Well, yes, if you give me enough tequila, right? Okay, so the idea in this is no tequila, but you get to dance, right? And so that's kind of how I look at it. And then suddenly I'll dance, right? And I've got like 5 left feet, you know, and no sense of rhythm, you know, and no sense of being able to go, oh, I really shouldn't be doing this, right? So that same sense of lack of inhibition, in a way, is what we kind of want to encourage in the writing process. And I think that the place that you're at tends to feed into that. So that courage really is just sitting and being quiet, or walking and being quiet and paying attention. And then taking what comes, letting one thing follow another, follow another, follow another. And as he says, a strange bonus can happen, that you can get this coherence. You suddenly look back and go, or you read over, oh yeah, I did, you know. And I always ask students, did you surprise yourself in any way, shape, form? Whether you like what you wrote or you didn't, you know, what you wrote or you did not like it. That's really almost immaterial. And generally, people are surprised by what they did and where it took them. And so that's pretty much it. And it's a very simple thing, and it's a very simple experience that we're undertaking. But it really does amaze me that miraculously things happen. You know, everyone goes, wow, at the end, you know. So that's why I love doing it. And so that's essentially the process that we undertake. Now, this idea that we think about, you know, this is a group activity. And then when we do the workshop at the end where we discuss things, we're really just listening. And I try to listen and give some feedback. Like if there's something that someone did, I go, oh, and I'll, you know, whatever experience I have as a writer, I'll try to point that out, right? Sometimes, and then other people point things out. And it gives us a chance to engage and converse and ask questions, because it is a conversation. And then we find out, we'll oftentimes have not students, but participants who are looking at the same thing in a location, but they'll have 2 completely different takes on the poem, right? And I say poem, but it can be a personal reflection, it can be a fiction, it can be what you might call journal writing, it can be, there's no real sense of whether it's a genre or not. And so that's how we share at the end. However, if you're by yourself, you know, like, well, what am I gonna do? It's COVID-19, you know, I have to go out, I have to go in a mask, I can't, you know, I don't know what your circumstances might be or your location, but we are in Montana, so we have a lot more freedom in terms of public space. So knowing that, as a solo person, you can do the same thing. However, that means you have to do a little preparation, right? Perhaps you could just simply say, it's a 20-minute walk today. I'm going through the neighborhood. I'm going to look at it as if I was suddenly plopped down here from the 18th century, and I'm just going to look at it, and I'm just going to pay attention. And then I'm going to sit down and find a spot, and I'm just going to write to what comes to me. You could do it that way. Or it could be a place that you've thought about for a while. For myself, we have I always make sure I get the name right, but I believe it's the Four Dances, and it's a Sacrifice Cliffs area by Billings, and it's just across the river. And it's a beautiful spot, which with the oil refineries notwithstanding, it's a beautiful spot depending on how you look, and you can just see down the river. And whenever I'm there, what I'm inclined to think about is William Clark coming up, right? And then I'm inclined to think about the people who, and particularly the Crow, who followed them and watched them but didn't make contact, right? So suddenly, that's my interest. I got my spot, I've got my interest. Now, I can help this out by reading, perhaps. Maybe I'm going to bring up the journals for that point and maybe read a passage to myself to get myself thinking. And because I've read, from the Crow's perspective of it, I can bring that into it, and suddenly I can go in that direction if I want. You can prepare a lot, or you can prepare not at all. Maybe your interest is geology. Maybe it's botany. Maybe you like, it's going to be this certain type of migration for certain birds, and who knows what it might be. But it's a sense of place, and you're going to follow it. Or you can work out things, gather 3 or 4 like-minded friends. Some of the best of these workshops have been, instead of 15 or 20 people, we've had 3 or 4, right? And everyone, and they were all strangers. And when they left, they weren't strangers, and they carried that group into it, into their lives afterwards. So you've got 4 or 5 people, your friends, and you can just design it and say, we're going to go here. This is the idea.